What is identity politics? And I guess, we can start, it started at the at the Kambaku River Collective 50 some odd years ago, or at least the idea was developed. Tell us how it was developed and what it's perceived to have mutated into, I guess.
Yeah. So the basic idea, as I understand it, as the Kambaku River Collective developed it, was identity politics is just doing politics starting from an understanding of your place in the social world, right? So you can start from the other direction. You can try to understand the whole social world, the whole social system, and do politics from there. But they thought it would be better to understand where you fit into things and then go from there. So whether, it's gender or race or, whatever is salient to you, that's a way that you can start thinking about what your political agendas and priorities are. And as they developed it, that was compatible with starting from there, but getting to working with other people and taking their concerns on board and so on and so forth. All the things that we think of under the heading coalitional politics maybe today. And what identity politics has morphed into for some people is something that's kind of anti-coalitional, anti-solidaristic. Like, I'm going to start thinking about where I fit in the social system and where people like me fit into the social system, and I'm going to end there. Like, that's who I'm fighting for. That's what the fight is about. What people like me are going through, so on and so forth.
Okay, so and let's talk about the critiques of identity politics that exist today, because they really do come from across the ideological spectrum, but they're different based upon where those people are situated on the spectrum. Walk us through those different critiques, and then let's talk about where yours fits in within that spectrum, if it does.
Yeah, I certainly think it fits in the spectrum. I'd say on the far right, you have an opposition to identity politics that is pretty nakedly, I think, just an investment in the way things are going, right? So people who pursue identity politics might want to change things on the basis of understanding the present system as patriarchal or anti-queer or anti-Black or something like that. And all those things are just fine to the people on the far right. On the center right and the center, I think there's more of a willingness to entertain the idea that something might be wrong systemically, with something might be unfair systemically with how things go, but they oppose the idea of doing politics from the perspective of any particular way in which the world is unfair, right? So we should have this kind of reflexive universalism. We should start by thinking, no, just, what are the good rules for anybody and for everybody? And then, there's a variety of criticisms further left than that. I think one of the more interesting ones, and one of the ones I'm actually more sympathetic to, is the criticism from what you might call, just to caricature it, the class reductionist left, right? So you're talking about all these kinds of identities, all these kinds of oppression, racism, sexism, queerphobia, all these things. But really, there's a particular kind of oppression that is more important, that gets left out of the story of most of these other identity politics, and that is the kinds of oppression that is linked to capitalism as a system and or class identity as a way of being. Those aren't the exact same thing, but they're similar. And so that's what we should focus on instead of identity politics. And, I think mine is probably the closest to that last one. But I think, any way of thinking of capitalism worth having is going to notice that the thing that organizes our economic system is also the thing that organizes all of the other kinds of oppression. And so that's why I think identity politics is still valuable, even if you thought that there was something particularly special about class or about capitalism as an aspect of how the world is put together.
And just going back over those, in terms of the right, it seems to me that it really is just an argument of they don't have a problem with identity politics as much as they do with which identities are maybe ascendant in our politics, right? I mean, like the right has been practicing identity politics, it seems to me, since the founding of the country. It's just that it has been so overwhelming, and they've had such an exclusive control over the terrain that nobody realized it, or I should say, not nobody, obviously, those people who have been marginalized and excluded, but it was never, that's just normal. That's just like oxygen, the fact that white identity politics would dominate. And so it's not so much identity, but they couch it as if this is a new phenomenon. It's just really, there's different players on the field now, as it were.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, for much of the last few centuries, it's just been naked domination of some identity groups over others. You know, I'm older than the end of formal apartheid in South Africa, right? You know, it was just a few decades before that a lot of civil rights legislation passed. For most of U.S. history, for most of the history of what we would now think of as the world, the last 500 years or so, apartheid, you know, segregation, explicit formal privileges and rights for some particular kinds of people over others has just been, you know, oxygen, as you put it, right? It's just been the way that things went. And I think there's not been a real change on the far right as far as thinking that that's, you know, not something to go for, right? That's still the way that they think the world should run. It's just now the moral etiquette of the day doesn't let you come out and say that. So you say a bunch of other things.
And in terms of the center, like what are they? And I get as you describe it, and I think there is, I attribute to them maybe a little bit more good faith in their, but what are they ignoring when they say that we should just, I mean, it's almost as if they're saying like we should have a colorblind and a gender blind society is almost, and anything else is, you know, almost like, you know, reverse discrimination on some level. Like, what are they missing conceptually in that assessment of what's going on?
One of the big things that they're missing, aside from the obvious thing, which is just naivete about how that would actually go, right? You know, how fairly will rules be applied, right? There's just a unwillingness to learn from policing and mass incarceration and all these kinds of things that clue us into what colorblindness means in practice. But I think even if you could get a system that would really genuinely apply rules in a quote unquote colorblind and fair way, I think a big thing that is missing from the centrist picture is just what the accumulated weight of the last 500 years means, right? You know, it's the, you know, some people are starting essentially with a 400-year head start in terms of the kinds of cultural networks they have access to, the kinds of money they have access to, the kinds of knowledge that has circulated among other people about how to deal with them. Even what language you speak affords you immense opportunities. What country you were born in affords you immense opportunities, and where you were born in that country's hierarchy. All those things are inextricable from just all of the hierarchies and inequalities of yesterday.
And then we should say, and that 400 years, I mean, that is that speaks to the durability of these structures in terms of going forward. You have, similar, at least analogous in some respects when it comes to gender and to sexual orientation that may or may not be as durable in some respects because of it's nuanced in that way, but but the dynamic is similar in terms of these things carrying forward. I think only recently did we just have a Supreme Court ruling that impacted the ability, I think it was of employers to fire someone because they're gay. I mean, just that was their own, and that was that's maybe months old, if anything. All right. So be that as it may. So and then on the when we talk about the critique from the left, as it were, in terms of, or what you would say is a bit of a caricature, but the class reductionist. We're talking about people essentially saying the priority should be class in when assessing this. And sometimes what is problematic with that is that it's not just priority, but it seems to sort of like completely eliminate another dynamic that may be at play, even if it emanates from the same capitalist structure that exists. All right. So with that sort of, somewhat remedial, but I think it's important everybody's on the same page on all these things. You are closest to that what you call the class reductionist critique, but how is it different from that critique?
So one of the main differences is just the thing that you were kind of gesturing towards at the end there. So it's one thing to say that there's a particular importance that class and labor and the kinds of things that are most squarely built into capitalism have in challenging the world. And it's another thing to say that those should take kind of exclusive focus or even primary focus in terms of challenging how our social structures work. Over the years and decades that followed the Second World War, a lot of the biggest changes to the world structure, politically and economically speaking, were won by nationalist movements. Many of these were led by people who were exclusive, who were very, serious Marxist-Leninists, but some of them weren't. And it just turns out that, what you need to get people together to move and to fight for one another may be different from, what a social scientist would use to explain how it is that they will succeed or fail, or, what particular variable it is. Whatever it is that people are responding to politically, if it is aligned with justice or even potentially aligned with justice, seems like something that should be taken seriously.
Let's speak about the what you call deference politics as we move forward and sort of discuss how sort of the original concept of identity politics you feel has been hijacked on some level. But what is deference politics?
So there's a closely related kind of way of thinking or genre of thought to identity politics, and that's something people call standpoint epistemology. And it basically just means it's not just that who you are and where you stand in society should be a place that you start from in figuring out your political agenda, but also when we're thinking about knowledge, who knows things, who has insight into how things work, we should also pay attention to that. And standpoint epistemology, that thought that where you are affects what you know, I think is just right. But there's the question from there, how do you put that into practice? What do you do with that realization? And what some people have done is just say, well, what I'm going to do is defer, right? In general, I'm going to find a person who is of the right kind of social position, the right kind of oppressed group, maybe who has the right kind of social experiences, and whatever that person's political judgment is going to become my political judgment. And I think the motivation behind that is a good one, but I think that's the kind of way of sifting through politics that is very easy to game by power structures. And if we just think about how our power structures work, it would be extremely unlikely that they wouldn't kind of distort that kind of process. Who are rich people going to put on TV? Whose books, whose ideas are they going to circulate? Are they going to be the ones that genuinely challenge the status quo, or are they going to be the ones that more often than not reflect interests that they have, or at least are compatible with interests that they have? That's the more likely option, I think. And so we can't be sure that the particular oppressed person's opinion that we're getting is really representative. And even if we could be sure of that, that just isn't the question that we should be asking when it comes to knowledge. What is the world like? What should we do? That's not about who's talking, but that's about the world. That's about what we're trying to accomplish.
Okay. And so did deference politics develop distinct from its being employed by the elite? And we'll get into defining the elite in a moment. But did it develop distinct from its I guess being used by the elite? I mean, how was that sequenced? I mean, because if I understand this correctly, it's basically a turnkey way for the elite to sort of shift where the topic is going to head. It's a one-stop shop on some level for redirecting what might be other issues in society on some level. But what was the sequencing of that? I mean, did deference politics just simply develop out of a sense of folks who were not maybe marginalized, feeling like this is the best that we can do? I mean, and then it was sort of hijacked on some level, or did it happen simultaneously?
I think the first thing to say is just, these are all old questions. You know, how do we know things? Which kind of people are in the right kind of position to know? So the terms that we use to describe them might be new, but these kind of problems and challenges are always, coming in and out of focus as years go by and as societies go through stages of development. As far as the last,
and I'm sorry, can I just clarify that? So this, on some level, this could be analogous to an appeal to authority, except for in the context of deference politics, the problem is that the authority may be dubious in terms of what it really speaks for, and whether it's representative. And I mean, so that's part of the issue there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And as far as, the things that have developed since this term identity politics came on the scene in the 70s, I think it's been happening at the same time. So there's a lot of intellectual movements, there's a lot of political movements that are thinking about what to do with knowledge and what to do with authority, and they're all acting at the same time. Some of them are going to be people who are, for principled reasons, thinking, no, we need to change how we do science. We need to change how we do policies. And we need to make those changes in ways that genuinely affirm that the people who are affected by this science and the policies know things, and our current scientific practices fail to reflect that. Right. So there are people who are pushing that line. And there are other people who were, on the HR committees of various mega corporations who said, if we hire somebody like this, and if we put this kind of person in the, commercial for our product, and so on and so forth, who have these, less principled more opportunistic ways of thinking about the contribution that identity makes. They were pushing a different line. And over time, which are people going to get more exposed to? Well, the people in group number 2 have way more resources, money, political reach, social reach than all the people in group number 1. And so over time, more and more of our exposure to any version of this thought about identity or standpoint is going to look like what people in group number 2 are doing. Now, some people are going to look at that and say, well, that is proof that there was never any radical potential of this thought. That's proof that this is co-optable. But from where I sit, that's just proof that identity politics is like everything else in a society that is structured to allow the people with the most money, resources, and social position the best opportunity to develop anything that they choose to develop.